joined today by Senator Lisa Baker. You recently unveiled a package of bills aimed to strengthen accountability and trust in the government. What are the bills that you are offering?
Well, good evening. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you to talk about this new session and a legislative package that I have introduced. And really, as you mentioned, it's about enhancing ethical standards. It's about ensuring accountability and really rebuilding trust in the system. And what I can say is that I hear often from constituents who express concerns about potential conflicts of interests on the part of elected officials and looking for greater transparency and stronger standards. And so the package that I have introduced will ban cash gifts and will limit gifts significantly. So there are two separate bills. As well as create an independent legislative conduct review board and allow legislators to reject the cost of living adjustment. In addition, I have legislation on lobbying reform, on the Ethics Commission, statements of financial interest, campaign disclosure, and for the proposal for Run for One, so that people aren't running for multiple offices and creating the potential for special elections if they're elected to one seat when they're running for both.
Have there been any specific incidences that inspired you to create this package?
Well, obviously, I have always had a great interest in keeping my information as transparent as possible, but I have to admit that the cash gift ban bill really was the result of a difficult situation here in northeastern Pennsylvania. About 15 years ago, we had two judges in Luzerne County who received significant cash gifts in a FedEx box. And it was known as, unfortunately, the tragic circumstance of Kids for Cash. And what really led me to introduce this bill initially was the fact that these judges were not in violation for accepting such a large cash gift, but for not reporting it. We've witnessed other cases in Pennsylvania where elected officials have taken cash gifts, have been charged, and as a result, it always has to fall down with the fact that they didn't report it properly. Most of my constituents look at that and say, "Are you kidding me? You mean you would be permitted from a lobbyist or someone seeking to influence state government that you could accept a large cash gift as a thank you?" And, I believe it's cleaner. It's the easiest way for us to advance forward without having that potential conflict. So the cash gift bill has been something that has been important to me for more than 10 years. I would point out that the Senate, the House, and the governor's office include this in their general operating rules, a very important step forward, but those are operating rules that can change. They don't have the same force of law that a statutory bill would. And so I think from that standpoint, there is no reason that I can think of for a public official to accept a cash gift. Keep in mind that under the proposal also, it would still allow close relatives and others by family relationship or personal relationship to make a gift to a lawmaker or a public official. So we're not limiting that, but what we're saying is it's an important reform measure that should apply not just to rules of state government officials, but should apply like in the case of the Luzerne County judges or a county commissioner or a township supervisor. So I think it's straightforward. It's an important reform and one that I was motivated by what occurred here in my community in northeastern Pennsylvania.
You also proposed a comprehensive gift ban. What is included under that law?
So this would be separate from the cash gifts, but it would prohibit public officials from accepting most gifts, most meals, travel, entertainment, and there are reasonable exclusions for nominal value. So whether it's an award, a charity event, or legally reported campaign donations. So as we look at, the one thing that I hear about is, giving gifts or large gifts of travel and entertainment, while we have reporting mechanisms now, this would limit it, and you would no longer be regarded, as accepting that, unless it's around $50 is the number we came at. And the reason we picked $50, it's a de minimis amount. I thought about when the softball team from Tunkhannock High School came to visit me with their state championship. They brought a T-shirt and a softball. So I could still accept that as a nominal gift from the district, or an award, a plaque that you may receive, a de minimis amount. But, instead of, having elected officials receiving large gifts, this would limit it in a very serious and significant way. And I think it's an important measure for us to consider. It would be gifts to public officials would be prohibited from lobbyists, principals, anyone with a government contract, anyone seeking to influence the official or official action. So a comprehensive, but enough that it allows for you to accept a cup of coffee or a bottle of water, or perhaps like I do, attend a state association, has a reception with their members, open to the general public, open to everyone to come, that you could then participate in that regard.
What feedback on these two bills have you gotten from your colleagues in the Senate?
I've had some very positive feedback, bipartisan support from Republicans and Democrats, and I'm very hopeful that we could perhaps have consideration in this session. And I think it's something that I hear frequently, as I mentioned, from my constituents. They don't understand why we would need to have large gifts. They pay for tickets to go to sporting events. They pay for tickets to attend functions. And they believe that, as an elected official, I should do the same.
The next bill in your package would establish a legislative conduct review board. What would the work of this board be?
So the Legislative Conduct Review Board would mirror, and we're still working on the details of putting the bill together, but it would mirror what we do with the Judicial Conduct Board for those in the judicial branch of government. It sets up an independent board to investigate and evaluate any type of allegations of unethical conduct, potentially harassment, public corruption, those types of things. And what we're hoping to include as part of the board, like the Judicial Conduct Board, it would include experts, laypersons, people of diverse backgrounds, legislators, and it would be designed to afford due process, both to the accused and the individual who has filed the complaint. And so we're working out a lot of the details. The bill has yet to be fully drafted, but I think setting up an independent review process similar to what we do with the judicial branch of government makes sense to me, and I believe it would offer that measure of transparency and due process for those involved.
How would this board's process of holding a legislator accountable for inappropriate behavior differ from the way that they're currently held accountable?
Well, I think, we have internal ethics committees within the General Assembly. Those deliberations and what occurs are somewhat confidential. I believe, this would certainly allow us to investigate, have the force similar to what is done with the Judicial Conduct Board. So there is a measure of confidentiality with that process, but I think you have independent people who are not within the structure of the system helping to evaluate and review it. And so, I think that would be important. The other thing that I've included in this as well, it would be allowing for the temporary suspension of voting or committee participation for someone under a credible investigation. And I believe that's an appropriate response. So we're still hammering out a number of these details to see how that actual process would work, but having due process will be appropriate for both parties, but having that independent structure, I believe, would be an added benefit to the evaluation process.
There's also legislation in this package about COLA and having legislatures be allowed to reject receiving a COLA. What is a COLA for those who may not know?
So I believe it was 1995, and I was not a member of the General Assembly at the time. They adopted a statutory provision that allows elected officials and government officials to receive a cost of living adjustment based on the consumer price index. Some years that price is a 0% increase. Some years it's quite significant, 7 or 8%. And it's an automatic adjustment. So as a member of the General Assembly, you are not permitted to decline that. And so currently, if you don't want to accept the COLA, you have to go through a process. You still have to pay taxes on the amount of the salary. You can donate it to charity or you can return it to the state treasury, but that provides unnecessarily a complicated time frame, wastes taxpayers' money, and I think, as we look to the future, we don't have an automatic cost of living adjustment for retired state employees and others. And so many of those folks, especially the people who retired prior to 2000, have said, why do you get a COLA and I haven't received one in more than 25 years? And it's a very legitimate question and concern. So this would change that. It would eliminate the problem, and it would allow the member to decline that and allow them to move forward without going through all the hurdles of returning it to the Treasury or donating it to an organization in their community.
Is there an incentive for any legislator who would turn down the COLA?
No specific incentive for that, but I think, as I mentioned, it's we look at our constituents, and in some cases, those who've retired long ago who have yet to receive a COLA in their benefit, and I think it makes sense for us to be mindful of that, to understand what those in our community are going through as well. And you can make that decision should you choose to keep your COLA. Then you would have to justify why you did, and how you should benefit from that. You need to justify that to the voters of your district.
This legislation would amend the public official compensation law. What does that law currently state?
Well, that included the original bill, as I mentioned, in 1995, that granted this automatic cost of living adjustment. So it would modify that legislation and permit you the authority and the ability to return it and not accept it.
What feedback have you heard from your fellow senators about this bill?
It is still being circulated, and so we're actively gathering co-sponsors, and I believe a number of people have already signed on, but hopefully we'll get good bipartisan support with it.
What are the other bills in this package? I know you mentioned a couple more.
Sure, and I'd be happy to talk about those. So one of the bills that I've introduced and am circulating a co-sponsor memo on is for advertising of amending the election code. So many times constituents get an advertisement during a campaign, and it says paid for by an organization, whatever that organization might be, NEPA First, or it doesn't say who they are, where they're from. And so they're seeking to influence the election, and individuals receiving that advertisement, whether it's on television or a flyer in the mail, no idea who these people are. And so this would expand the requirement that you would have to disclose, and it's a very transparency oriented bill. You would have to disclose who your top 5 donors are to the organization. So if I'm getting a flyer that says Senator Baker is not worthy of office, and it's written by someone and you don't even know who it is, at least with this legislation, those top 5 donors, under transparency, under the rules, you would know who it was, who was writing the check and making those comments and statements. So I think a good bipartisan bill. I have had several Republicans and Democrats join me on that. And as I mentioned, we want transparency. When you're seeking to influence an election, it should include information about who is seeking to influence the election.
You also mentioned a bill about running for one campaign at a time. Can you talk about why you feel like that's important for Pennsylvania to have in place?
I do, and I think as we look around, there are many of us who run for office, you file your petitions, you tell your neighbors, your constituents, you're seeking re-election to be their state senator. It seems odd to me that you would also be circulating, nominating petitions, telling your neighbors and friends that you'd like to be the state treasurer or the state attorney general while you're serving as a state house member or state senator. And the reason I believe it's important that you choose, we shouldn't be running for office to win by default. Oh, okay, I didn't win this one, so I'm going to stick with the one that that I won or that I filed for. So I think we're seeing far too many special elections. Had a candidate who was on the ballot last fall for both state representative and a statewide row office, won the statewide row office, we would be in the position of having to fund and conduct a special election. I don't think that's fair to the taxpayers. I don't think that's fair to the constituents. If you're running for office, you have to have a reason why you're running, why you want to serve, and you should pick that one office and run for that.
Along with this package of bills, your office has also released some memos about some other bills you want to propose during this legislative session, one of which require a Senate confirmation for the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency Director. Why focus on this agency?
Well, we have many other smaller agencies in state government with less impact and touch to the community that require Senate confirmation. My interest in this actually goes back to the Valentine's snowstorm of 2007, shortly after I was first elected to the Senate. And we had a report that the then Rendell administration secured through James Lee Witt. And one of the things that report recommended was elevating this role into a cabinet level position. I believe that having it as a cabinet level position creates the kind of authority. You keep in mind that when you're dealing with emergency response, it's a lot of taxpayer and federal government dollars that are touching our communities, our townships, our boroughs. And so I believe that it is an elevated position that should be subject to Senate confirmation, so that just as we do with the banking secretary or the DCD secretary, members of the Senate have the opportunity to understand what are your priorities, how are you operating, what do you want to focus on, and how do you intend to serve the Commonwealth. So for me, it goes back to the Valentine's Day snowstorm, and it's been a recommendation for a number of years, and I think it's common sense. It's a highly elevated position, and one that deals with millions and millions of dollars, and having it not subject to Senate confirmation doesn't make sense to me.
How is the PEMA director currently chosen?
Currently, the PEMA director is an appointee of the governor, and so no requirement for engagement with members of the Senate, and I think it's not about politics. I don't view this as looking at that position in a political way. That's a nonpartisan position. I view this as accountability, transparency, and qualifications. I want to know, just as I do with any other cabinet official coming before us, and the fact that you're dealing with so many issues, and we see so much occurring in our communities with natural and man-made disasters, how that leader operates is so crucial to the recovery and the rebuilding after a disaster. And so I've reintroduced the PEMA director bill for that reason.
Lastly, the new legislative session has just begun, and you were reappointed Senate Majority Caucus Administrator. What do you do in that role?
So as a member of leadership, I am one of the Senate Republican Caucus leaders, and very proud to be an appointee of President Pro Tem Kim Ward. One of the interesting responsibilities that I have the opportunity to lead is our chaplain program, a long history in Pennsylvania of ecumenical men and women who come into our session and offer the Senate prayer. And so we recruit, we organize, and ensure that every opening day of session begins with a prayer from a chaplain from around the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So an interesting role, but a very historical role, and something that my staff and I are very proud to do. In fact, I was honored to offer the prayer myself on swearing in day and share some reflections, personal reflections from my own family history. My family were part of Pennsylvania since they arrived here with William Penn aboard the Welcome in 1682. And so offering that prayer gave me that deep personal reflection that goes back to my own family history here in the Commonwealth.
And besides this package of bills and your PEMA bill, what are some other priorities you have for this session?
So as chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, that is a committee of wide reach and wide involvement. And so last year, we spent a great deal of time focusing on community safety and protection and protecting vulnerable populations. I was very pleased to work with others to reform our guardianship law here in the Commonwealth. And so when you think about vulnerable people like those under the court requirement of guardianship, Senator Art Haywood and I modified our law. We now have a requirement that an individual seeking guardianship can have an attorney with them, and that they get evaluated every year. Many people look at what happened with Britney Spears for many, many years involved in the system. And this would ensure that someone who is in the system is evaluated every year. So we will continue that focus. We will continue the focus on protecting the community. We've worked diligently on issues with human trafficking, porch pirating, the SEPTA issues with crime in that area. So you will see a continued push and involvement with protecting our communities, protecting vulnerable populations. Personally, I have always had a great interest in ensuring the safety and well-being of young children. Was honored to work with Senator Sanacero last year on Caden's law, which updated our child custody law to include 7 factors, 7 crimes that could be looked at when considering child custody. And that was for little Caden Mancuso from Bucks County. So our emphasis in the committee is wide-ranging, and it's such a privilege to serve on that committee, but with a special emphasis, as I said, on protecting our communities, helping vulnerable populations, and ensuring that our children are safe.
Senator Lisa Baker, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.